Hey there, this is Peter Svidler for Chess24, and the video I mentioned in passing as an idea when I was recording my videos about the Queen b3 Grunfeld. A video I thought might be interesting as a kind of infotainment. It's going to be somewhat less chess heavy than the opening videos in this series, but I thought it might be interesting to tell you about the three games I played in 1999 in pretty much the same line of the Grunfeld against the three world champions, the reigning world champion, the ex-world champion and the future world champion, and in general to tell you a little bit about how my 1999 went. I know it was a long time ago and has no particular relevance, but well, as they say, it's my series and why not? And the chess content, I think, is quite interesting. All three games are fairly remarkable in their own way, and let's see how this goes. I'm not quite sure about this format myself, but this whole project is new to me, so this might turn out to be fine as well, so let's give it a shot. 1998 went quite well for me. I did okay. I finished fine in my first ever Linares, tied for first in the Russian Championship, as was my norm in those years, not anymore, but in those years I was very, very consistent in the Russian Championships. And I got quite a lot of top-level invitations because I was the new kid on the scene, and people were interested to see me play in the top events. And the first top event I had to prepare for was Vike in January. And I went there with very high hopes. I thought, you know, this is my chance to shine, and I should be playing well, because I could remember playing well pretty much throughout '98. And Vike was the first tournament where the pattern was something I was completely unused to in those years, but which I came to recognize and sort of accept as my own in the future years. That is, out of the 13 rounds in Vike, I won one, lost one, and made 11 draws. And towards the second half of the tournament, I was playing pretty much kamikaze chess with black, because I was going more than slightly mad with all the drawing I was doing. And yet, even when I played the lines I knew were almost losing by force, I would still make a draw somehow. And this drove me mad even further. The one game I won was against my current colleague Rustam Kasimdzhanov, who was also playing perhaps his first major tournament, and felt that he also needed to play for a win in every single game. So in the game against me, he perhaps overpressed in a position where the normal result would have been yet another draw. And I lost to Garry Kasparov, which is of course perfectly fine and normal. There's no shame in losing to Kasparov. And it was quite a remarkable game, which I remember not feeling even remotely disappointed after the game, because I felt that I was beaten by someone at the top of his game, and someone who has shown a very interesting opening idea in a line I felt I knew quite well. So all in all, this particular game gave me no cause for great alarm. It went like this. After knight c3 g5, as a small side note, it is not perhaps the most obvious choice to play Grunfeld with black against Kasparov, because he has some ideas about this opening, let's put it mildly. But first of all, in those years, it's still true even now, but in those years in particular, I didn't have that wide of an opening repertoire. And secondly, I felt, wouldn't it be interesting to find out what will happen to me if I play the Grunfeld against Kasparov? You know, this feeling of not invincibility as such, but kind of wonder. I knew this wasn't going to be a walk in the park, but I was very interested to see what he will show if I do that. And he did show something. Knight f3, bishop g7, queen b3, takes castles, e4, a6, e5, b5, queen b3, knight d7. A very topical line in those years as well. And I had some experience with this line and felt I'm reasonably well prepared here. And here he played e6, This move I knew. I thought fe6. This has always been considered to be completely harmless, so what's your plan? And bishop e3, which at that point in time was a novelty. And here I sank into thought, and I could immediately see that my choice was pretty clear cut. I could play knight f6, to which white will reply a4, completely demolishing my queenside structure, and I will have to defend some kind of a position in which I will have for a meager pawn a very passive position with unclear prospects. Or I could play knight b6, to which he will reply a4, more than likely, and I will have to work very hard not to get mated. And remember, I was playing Kasparov, who is universally accepted to be one of the better dynamic attacking players in the history of chess. So from the practical viewpoint, I think maybe knight f6 was a bit of a better idea. But once again, I was very curious to see what exactly will befall of me if, that's probably not grammatically correct, but anyway, what will happen to me if I play knight b6 against Kasparov, so I did. Knight b6, h4, knight c6, black obviously needs to create some counterplay, otherwise he will get mated for absolutely nothing. h5, rook f3, gf3, knight takes d4. Other options for black are really not worth mentioning. For instance, if you go knight takes d4 here, then after takes, rook d1, c5, takes, and queen c2, black is really almost lost already. So rook f3, gf3, and knight takes d4, rook d1. And at this point I realized, not that it surprised me greatly, but I realized just how difficult my task was, because I thought my reaction was the most principled one, and I thought this is how black should react to a new idea, by sort of tackling it head on. And after rook d1 I realized that this is perhaps something my opponent has expected and is prepared for, and that my position is very, very risky. I pretty much have to play c5 here, bishop d4, cd4, h takes g6, and I played h6 here, which I thought was a reasonable idea, because I don't want to be opening files on the king's side. And if h takes g6, which has actually been played since in a game, both queen c2 and rook g1 are incredibly strong. In particular, queen c2 almost forces queen f8, because if queen e8, then bishop d3 gets through and white probably gives mate. So after queen c2, black more or less has to play queen f8, take, queen f5, check, back, takes, and knight e2. And this endgame is, well, if it's not lost, it's pretty close to it. So I went h6, and for a second there I felt mildly optimistic, because I thought, okay, next move I will play knight d5, and he will have to either take this knight, and then I will have some kind of a pawn feast in the center I could at least sort of play behind. Or if he doesn't take, then I'm blocking off some of the avenues of his attack, and I have once again something to base my position on. The knight on d5 will be a very strong piece. And in this position, Kasparov thought for a bit and played rook h5. And this is where I finally figured out this is probably not going to be my day. Because now knight d5 is impossible, white is free to develop his initiative if I do nothing. And also I don't really have any particularly useful moves, apart from queen e8, which is what I did. It's worth noting that in 2010, Shabalov decided to improve on Kasparov's play and went rook h4 and also won quite convincingly, but I think rook h5 is stronger. I quite like rook h5, and I remember Kasparov being very proud of this game, of this move after the game, which should tell you something. Queen e8, knight e2, queen g6, rook h1, and here I realized that, well, I'm in a lot of trouble, because I was more or less forced to take the pawn on g6, which I was very much counting on to use as a kind of a human shield for the remainder of the game, because it was blockading one of the avenues along which I will be getting mated later on. And also the pawn on d4 is now falling, which makes white's attacking task much easier. I will go through the remainder of the game reasonably fast, because I think by this point black's position is beyond repair. I went king h8, rook g1, queen f7, knight d4, knight g5, Once again, if black could just play bishop d7, rook f8, and maybe one more move, he would be doing okay-ish. But this is not going to happen because queen d3, bishop d7, and queen e4. And white is just in time to install his pieces into proper positions. Rook c8, bishop d3, threatening mate in 1, rook c5, queen h4. And you can just see how white's pieces are all sort of clicking into place. Kasparov's play in this game, I think, is exemplary throughout most of it, if not all of it. Rook c5, trying to establish some sort of defense along the 5th. Knight a2. Another excellent move, because now the knight is sometimes going to f4. And if e5, it will go to c3. And then perhaps to e4, and black is just stuck watching white improve his position and then give mate. I went knight d5. It's not really a particularly good move, but I think nothing really helps black here. Rook g6, queen f8. You can't allow rook takes h6 check, queen e4. Threatening once again rook h6 and queen h7, queen f7. And now the final accord, king d2, a very nice looking move. And now rook cg1 or rook h1 are coming with devastating effect. Knight f6, queen e3. And here I resigned. I've been criticized even for that particular resignation because people felt that it was a bit premature, but I think it's not really, and I think that in this position I was perfectly justified to stop the clocks. But you will see the same decision in the second game, and there I really could have and maybe should have continued. Anyway, I was quite happy with that game because I felt that, you know, I've been beaten by a legend and deservedly beaten. And it wasn't really through my own bad play, but because I was playing somebody who was better prepared and is in general a better player than I am. I went back home and I thought repaired this line. And when I went to Linares in February, I thought that I'm more than happy to repeat this line because I know what to do now. And I got the same position in round 6 against Vishy Anand. I have to say that I started in Linares quite well. In round 1, I almost beat Kasparov with black. And I was doing reasonably well. I felt confident and I felt that the tournament is going well, and by round 5 I was on +1, and if anything I could have had, I thought, more points than less. And then I lost this game to Vishy, and I lost the 3 next games after it, and that did not really improve my mood at all. And the beginning of this, the longest by far sequence of losses in my career was this game against Vishy. We reached this position reasonably fast, and here Vishy, instead of playing e6, went for h4, giving me a bit of a break in the e6 line. I went c5, e6, c4. In his notes to the game, I think Vishy said that he wasn't concentrating on this particular line very much, so I went queen d1. I mean, he went queen d1, this is the correct move, but he wasn't... what I meant to say that he wasn't as booked up as he perhaps was in some other positions. Ef, rook f7, h5, knight c6, takes bishop e3. This is the tabby of the h4 line, so to speak. And I want to remind you that I cover this quite extensively in my queen b3 videos. And in this position, apart from the move I made in this game and the most obvious move in the position, namely bishop g4, black has a very interesting idea, knight g5, which I think is very, very sensible, and I think it's highly recommended you look at that. But in this position, I started thinking, and I came up with this idea of playing bishop f5, which is maybe not the best move in the position, but is certainly very, very playable. He went knight g5, otherwise it's not clear what he's doing. Rook f6. Instead of rook f6, knight takes d4 is also very playable, but I was very consumed by the idea of going rook f6, g4, bishop e6, knight ce4, and bishop g5. It appealed to my aesthetical sense very much to just leave the rook on f6 on prise and to occupy the all-important d5 square. And taking on f6 is, of course, unattractive. Vishy played queen d2. In a later game, Rustam Kasimdzhanov tried playing f3 immediately here, and after e5, d5, knight e5 was perhaps already slightly worse in the game against Khalifman, which he didn't manage to draw. Queen d2, I think, is the correct move. And here I got very much carried away. I have this feeling that I normally treasure very much, and which generally I trust, and it normally doesn't let me down. But sometimes you get a feeling during the game that you're completely in control, and you know what's what, and you know what the correct move is. And in my particular case, when I feel like that, I think it's likely that some kind of somewhat left field solutions will come to mind. And in this particular case, the move I made on the board, rook d6, just appealed to my senses so much, because I felt that it's a rare case of a move where, you know, the rook goes from one square on which it is attacked to another square on which it is attacked. And also I thought it was a decent move in general, because I'm trying to capture on d4, which is a very sensible idea. Unfortunately, it has tactical problems, as you will soon see. Instead of this, black should play queen d7, and the position after bishop g2. I've tried analyzing this position for many a time in my life, and I always stop short, because I don't quite see how you can analyze it. It's just such a complete mess. And the fact that the first line of the machine in this position, at least on my machine, is a5, to which white replies by playing a2, a3, this is just too much for me in my current state. So since this position is not really very, very critical to our story, I will leave it at that. And after rook d6, what I missed is that I can play f3, and the threat of queen h2 is just incredibly powerful. And it's very important that the rook is no longer on f6, because otherwise black would be able to play rook takes f3 in this position, and he would do well. But now it's impossible, and black is under a severe attack. The remainder of the game is a very, very instructive attack by Vishy. I went bishop takes e4, I could see no other choice, fe4. Knight takes d4 loses pretty much by force. For instance, a very nice variation is knight d4, rook d4, I mean bishop d4, rook d4, queen f2. And now, for instance, if bishop f6, rook h8 just wins on the spot. I think it's quite beautiful. So after f4, I went knight d7. He went queen h2, knight f8, e5. The attack develops very, very naturally. Here, rook d7, knight e6. Queen a5 check. Here I was very proud to have found this geometrical idea. If instead I take the knight, he goes bishop takes c4, bc, queen h7, and wherever the king goes, the check along the f-file just wins on the spot. So queen a5 check, bishop d2, knight takes e5, a very beautiful move, which unfortunately doesn't help, because white doesn't take anything, he just goes bishop e2. And here I have to play c3, which is what I did. And here Vishy played bishop takes c3, which is not very good. Instead, b takes c3 was almost completely winning. And after bishop takes c3, I played b4. He went knight takes g7. And in this position, I could see perfectly well that I can play knight f7, which almost forces bishop d2, king takes g7. But I honestly did not believe I will save this game. And then also, when looking in the position after knight takes g7, I realized I have my chance to sort of enter the history books here and now, and I thought I must grab it with both hands. Once again, a decision which will probably get me laughed out of the room in most polite companies, but I just thought, you know, I have to do it, because when will be my next chance? So I just went b takes c3. Vishy looked at me somewhat quizzically, because this is not a particularly good move, and went queen h8 check. I played king f7, and before he could react, I looked up and said, Vishy, please castle. He was somewhat surprised, and then he smiled and did castle. And the point of this dialogue was, I was very, very worried he might choose not to do that, and he will play rook f1 check instead. Both moves win on the spot, but the whole point of me taking before beyond c3 was that I wanted at least one of my games, and probably this will end up the one of my games in my entire life, which will end by castles check on move 31. I think in general castling on move 31 is not a very frequent occurrence, and castling with check and winning the game with this move is going to be even rarer. So I thought this is something I should absolutely have it in my resume, and instead of continuing the game by playing knight f7, I did that. Which is perhaps somewhat muddled thinking if you consider yourself a chess professional, but that was my decision then. Linares, I finished tied for dead last. I almost rescued the tournament. After losing 4 in a row, I won the next game, and then almost won. I had a completely winning position against Veselin Topalov, which I eventually lost, and finished on -3. And in that already somewhat depressed state, I think it was my first ever last place in a tournament, and it was a kind of a new experience for me. I went to play the Dos Hermanas tournament in April, which also didn't go according to plan, and one of the reasons it didn't go according to plan was the game against Karpov, which once again saw this position, and Karpov returned to e6. I was very ready for that. I took on e6, he went bishop e3, and I blitzed out knight f6. Once again, I think knight b6 is problematic for black. There's no equality there. But from a purely practical point of view, getting a position I was about to get against Karpov in particular is also not a very brilliant idea. And it's notable how I chose exactly the wrong positions against perhaps all 3 players. I chose an incredibly messy position by design against Vishy, who is very, very good in messy positions, I have to say. I chose to try and withstand a direct attack against Kasparov, and I chose a slightly worse endgame against Karpov. Well played me. Knight f6, a4. But here I was prepared. We looked at this position with my coach, Andrei Lukin, and I thought I knew everything that I needed to know. ba4. Once again, I remind you that b4 is a perfectly legitimate move in this position, and I think it's maybe even better than b takes a4 in terms of simplicity of play. Rook a4, knight c6, bishop c4. The following line was blitzed out by both me and Karpov. We both knew that this was where it was headed. Bishop e6, queen e6, queen d6. Of course, white is not going to take on d6, knight g5, rook b2, and castles. Knight f7 is, it's too early for knight f7, white needs to finish development. And in this position, the best move is rook c2. I'm not quite sure why I played knight d8. It's been too long ago for me to remember whether I forgot something or I just missed castles in my analysis at home, which is kind of hard to believe because it's the most obvious move in the position. And I want to show you a particular line after rook c2, which I think is the best move, which I found when I was preparing this video, and it has no particular relevance, but I think it just ends in a position which I want to show you, since this is, as I said, more infotainment than just purely informative. Rook c4, knight a5, rook c5. These moves are quite forced. Knight b7. In a game between Sashikiran and Bakro, black took on e6 and played rook c8, and were also slightly worse in an endgame. But knight b7 is more critical. Now knight f7 check. It takes everything. In this position, queen d3 loses to rook d1, as does queen d8, because white catches the rook, and after queen d3, once again, rook d1 wins. So queen e5, rook d1, h5. Now the attempt to give immediate mate by playing knight e4, queen e4, bishop h6 seems to be succeeding for a second. But then you find knight e8 and you realize that maybe black is even better because there is no mate, and the back rank of white is also quite weak. So bishop d4, queen f4. And in this position, I had very, very long analysis trying to prove this is a draw. This is not perhaps a draw, but I want to show you a particular line which I think is very interesting geometrically. Queen e7, rook g2, queen d8 check, king h7, g3. And now objectively the strongest move for black is probably rook d1, knight g1, queen f3, after which white has to take on f6. And it is perhaps a draw, or maybe not a draw after bishop f6, queen f6, queen takes c7. Black does have decent drawing chances, but to prove it's an absolute draw is quite difficult. But this is not what I wanted to show you. What I wanted to show you is the move queen e4, which is, I mean, a very appealing move from the aesthetical point of view. And white is probably winning the bishop endgame after takes, queen e1 check, king g2 takes, and bishop takes f6. And once again, I'm not recommending you play this with black, but the reason I started this whole thing is knight takes e4, rook d1, king g2, knight e4, queen c7, rook d4, c6. It seems like white is winning here, but after rook d2, king f3, knight f2, queen b7, knight g4, c7, knight takes h2, king e4. This is actually quite forcing. And here, rook c2, c8, rook c8, queen c8. This is the position I wanted to show you, because I think not everybody knows that even in this position, even if white somehow manages to exchange the pawn on g3 for the 3 remaining black pawns, and I don't think he will, but even if you take off all of black's pawns and the pawn on g3, and you put the black knight on e5, this setup, king h7, bishop knight e5, and bishop g7, is a draw against the queen. And this is a little known nugget of a fact, which I quite like, and this is the whole reason I went through this very long and not particularly interesting from a purely theoretical point of view line, because I thought it will be interesting to some of you maybe to learn that this actually is a fortress which in some rare cases you can actually aim for. Anyway, instead of all this, I played knight d8 and expertly headed for a slightly worse endgame against perhaps the most dangerous player of positions where he has advantage and no risk. So queen h3, queen d7, Karpov very happily took on d7, knight d7, rook a6. And this endgame is very difficult to annotate, so I will just give you the next 15 moves or so, and you can marvel at how, without doing very much, Karpov is just constantly improving his position and waiting for minor inaccuracies. And by the first time control, I was almost lost, perhaps even completely lost. Knight b6, h4, fixing some advancing on the king side, gaining some space, rook c2, knight c4, h6, knight c6. It seems as if black is not really doing all that badly here to begin with, because the weaknesses is somewhat covered, the rook on c2 is active. This is the first thing that white does something about. Rook a1, knight b4, rook fc1, exchanging the one active piece black has. And now knight c5, rook f6, bishop d2, very quietly keeping the pressure on. White just improves his position step by step. Rook d6, aiming to play rook knight d7 perhaps. Knight b6, of course white doesn't allow it. If now rook e6, then knight d8, knight c6 looks like an attractive idea. I went rook f6. Now the second knight comes in, knight e5, king h7, g3. Beat by beat, white is improving his position, and it becomes very, very difficult to breathe. Rook f8, trying to activate at least one piece, knight c5, rook a8. But now, very quietly, white doesn't, of course, allow the rook on the second, rook c2. Here I realized that, let's say, if I go rook a1, rook g1, the king will just come over to e2 and drive the rook away, and it's just, I could waste another 2 tempi achieving absolutely nothing. So I went back to d8, king g2, and here perhaps in some mild time trouble, I could tolerate it no longer and started exchanging pieces. I took on e5, d5, knight d7, and knight e6 also looks quite dangerous for black here, but Karpov took an even more sort of classical approach. He took on d7, rook d7, and fixed the entire black structure by playing rook c6. Now the black knight has absolutely no constructive moves. The rook on d7 is stuck protecting c7 and d7, and there's constantly a threat of h4, h5, destroying the black king side. And here I think it's as good time as any to stop, because the position is already perhaps lost, and I was not able to save it, obviously. This, I think, concludes the overview of the 2 queen b3 games I lost to exceptional players in '99. '99, as you can perhaps glean from this video, was not a particularly good year for me. By the end of it, I was out of the top 20, out of the 2700 club, and it took me the best part, I think, of 2 years to recover from that half a year stretch. But I did eventually recover, and I didn't stop playing the Grunfeld. I never really blamed the Grunfeld for any of this. And in general, I don't think I even played those 3 games particularly badly. I just played against very, very strong players who were playing very, very well in those particular games. But I wanted to show you those games as a kind of an amusing anecdote and like a story, half a year in a life of a Grunfeld player to give you an idea of the opening when you're playing against strong players, and what can happen to you if you're not very precise. Anyway, I'm not sure what you will think of this format, and I'm not sure I will be making much more of videos like that, but I thought I'd make one and see what the reaction is. Thanks for watching. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.